Thursday night in Inglewood, which, morning 5, so it's I lived there for a long time. And then we moved to the other end of the festival. I finally lived there. So I'm 25th and old. I met her here. And I came here when I was a teenager. I came here when I was 13. I was an orphan. When I was liberated, just related.
This is on, but I have to control. Should I grab her? This is the mic. When she sees that green light, she'll take it.
This is my vendor. She's sitting.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started here in a few seconds, so let the people in the back get their seats. I want to start by saying thank you to each and every one of you for joining the City of Edina today for today's 8th annual Days of Remembrance. My name is Jasmine Brett Stringer Moore. I am one of the newest members of the Human Rights and Relations Commission, and it's my honor to serve as the MC today. The City of Edina is committed to remembering those who perished and honoring the survivors and liberators of the Holocaust. Following a proclamation that was adopted in 2012 by Mayor Jim Hovland, who's here today, and the City of Edina City Council, and I believe we have a few City Council members in attendance today, so if you would raise your hand, just because you won't be speaking, but we have City Councilman Bob right there. The City of Edina began to recognize the National Days of Remembrance annually to raise awareness and understanding for those whose lives and cultures have changed forever because of the Holocaust and other genocides. And more importantly, to encourage our community, because this is our community, to reflect on the need for respect for all people. Today is a very special day. We have the honor, and I'm going to say privilege, from hearing from Holocaust survivor Reva Keyboard. Anybody familiar with Miss Reva? Did anyone see the video? Raise your hand. Yeah, aren't we in for a treat, a true in-person history lesson and perspective today, who with her late husband, Ben, was photographed for the Transfer of Memory exhibition. Has anybody seen that exhibition? Which is a touring exhibit of Minnesota Holocaust survivors. And after we hear from Ms. Reva, we are going to hear from the Transfer of Memory photographer, Mr. David Sherman. David, will you raise your hand? David is in the back corner. You probably guessed he was a photographer because what does he have on his shoulder? But before we begin, we are going to have a few words from the mayor of the City of Edina, Mr. Jim Hovland.
Thank you. Well, welcome everyone, especially I'd say welcome to our friends, Reva's many friends, I'm thinking from St. Louis Park, that are joining us. And it's kind of like a big neighborhood, really, over on this west side with Edina and St. Louis Park. Mayor Spano and I were together yesterday at a youth climate conference. And so we all welcome you to Edina today to help hear Reva's witness of things that we all need to keep in mind. And this is a lesson that we don't seem to be able to get right. That we had this Holocaust that she's going to talk about and her personal experiences, as Jasmine mentioned. But there have been many events of genocide since World War II that we would condemn as well as communities. So one of the things that I think you'll hear Reva say, at least Pat Arsenault in our local newspaper talked about one of Reva's strongest thoughts from surviving is that if you see or hear of injustice, it's up to us to speak out. That requires some courage because it involves some risk. Sometimes it involves risk at your place of employment. It could involve risk with your neighbors. But we've got to think about the consequences of not speaking up. And so I think all of us, not only Reva as a first-hand witness, but all of us that are witnessing things that we don't think are appropriate, that speak to injustice, that speak to other things that we don't think are appropriate, and the way people engage each other as people. We need to speak up to those things. So words are not only important, but actions too. And then I just want to talk a little bit about some of the things that we're doing as a community to reflect who we are. What is Edina as a community? Who are we as a people here? So we've been doing a great deal of work on race and equity. I'm really quite proud of our Human Rights and Relations Commission because 7 years ago, I didn't realize it had gone this fast. 7 years ago, there was a National Day of Remembrance. And there were a few cities in the Twin Cities that celebrated that National Day of Remembrance or honored all those folks that were Holocaust survivors. And then the whole thing seemed to kind of fizzle out. It shouldn't be just Edina that is recognizing this on a continuing basis, that we need to have this National Day of Remembrance year after year after year to make sure that we all remember what's happened. So that's one thing I'm proud of our Human Rights and Relations Commission about. So the race and equity work we're doing, the work we're doing on making sure that people have a place to live, that want to live here, the aspects of affordable housing, and making sure that all of our kids are properly educated. That if they need food, we're going to make sure that no child goes without food through this new meal fund that's been set up. And, excuse me, the Edina Give and Go program, which helps kids get the things that they need to be successful. If a child needs a musical instrument, there's a group of people in town that have formed a nonprofit that make sure that every kid has a chance to reach their full potential. And I know St. Louis Park is particularly good about that too, and we're both education-centric. So I really look forward to the program today. Reva, it was nice to sit next to you just momentarily and visit with you. And David, thanks for coming as well. And so I don't know who is up next. Are you coming back up, Jasmine? So thank you for everybody for coming today. It'll be a wonderful program.
Thank you so much for your words and official welcome, Jim. Next, we are going to hear from Ms. Judy Halper. And Halper, is the CEO of the Jewish Family Children's Service of Minneapolis. And she is going to officially introduce Ms. Reva to us. And after Ms. Reva's presentation, we are going to hear from the photographer. And then there will be a Q&A, which is not listed into the program, but if you have some questions, there will be a time for a Q&A. So Judy.
Thank you. Well, thank you. This is amazing. Thank you to all of my friends and family and previous coworkers and neighbors, everybody who turned out today. It was really exciting for me to get into something I didn't know what I was getting into. Several months ago, I just said, well, I could help out with that program. Just as an Edinan. I've lived in Edina for 34 years, and I thought, well, I could do something. And here's where I'm now standing today. I did not see this coming. In my other 24 hours a day, I serve as the CEO of Jewish Family and Children's Service of Minneapolis, where I've been the CEO for almost 13 years, and I've worked there almost 25 years. And one of the things I like to say about my organization that fills me actually with pride, is that the organization began in 1910, and at that time, the reason that we established was to serve the needs of immigrants and refugees. And over the course of the last 108 years, we've continued to do that. Certainly, we did that before and after World War II. And again, in the 80s and 90s, there were two waves of immigrants, refugees from the former Soviet Union. And it was our privilege to also help those folks get resettled. We do a lot of things besides resettlement, but it all began with helping people who needed to have a little helping hand to establish themselves and then ultimately contribute to our community in such meaningful ways. So that's a little bit about me, but you did not come to hear about me. It's really my privilege to introduce Reva Keyboard today. And I asked Reva how she wanted me to introduce her, and she actually said, just say I'm Reva Keyboard and I am a Holocaust survivor. And so I have no fancy introductions for you, but I can tell you that Reva is an amazing woman with a remarkable story, and I know that you will be very inspired by hearing it. So it is my privilege to now introduce Reva Keyboard.
I was born in Warsaw, Poland, in 1933. I remember when the Germans came in, and actually the soldiers, they weren't so bad. We lined up in lines to get food. They gave us soup and bread, and that was my first memory of the German soldiers. They were not that bad, but we learned later on what it was going to be like. The Warsaw Ghetto towards the end looked like people walking around like zombies, dead bodies, people who had starved from hunger. It was the most devastating place to live in. They took away everybody's dignity, you know? I was very, very hungry, and I told my mother that I was hungry, and she said to me, Rivala, I have nothing to give you. There's nothing to eat. what you should do is take this big rubber ball and go out and play, and you'll forget that you're hungry. We were put on trains and taken to a camp called Demblin. There were 11 children in the camp. I was the oldest among the 11. And then there was this German who said to me, "Schmeiß das Kind weg, throw the child away," because I was holding this 6-month-old little baby. I ran into the dirty clothing that the women had taken off, a pile of dirty clothes. And I could see that the same German took a machine gun and killed all 11 children right in front of me while I was watching them. I ran into the women's barrack, and the women sort of attacked me, saying, "Where are all the kids? What happened to the children?" And I said, "I don't know." I believe they probably knew. I didn't have to tell them. I was one of the youngest in my camp. I survived when I was 12. And I feel if I'm not going to speak out now, it'll be up to my children and my grandchildren and maybe great-grandchildren to tell the story of the Holocaust. So we have to speak up. Whatever you see injustices at all, you have to speak up. It bothers me a great deal when I see somebody who's hungry. It bothers me if I see a homeless person. It bothers me when I see people standing in line for food, because all these things come back to me all the time.
Are you angry?
Am I angry? I'm angry. I tell you what I'm angry. I'm angry mostly because I was an orphan. They deprived me of my mother and father. They deprived me of grandparents, of cousins. They deprived me of a childhood that I never had. Yes, I'm angry. But at the same time, I'm also very happy that I'm here in America and for the opportunities that I had and what America had given to me. I'm very happy about that. My name is Riva Keyboard, and this is my brief but spectacular take on being a survivor. First of all, I wanted to thank everybody for coming here. I'm really honored that you came to listen to me. I want to thank, actually, David Sherman is in charge of this because he's the one who started it all. And you're going to listen to him later. He's going to explain the whole thing. But I have to be thankful to him because he has made me very popular all of a sudden. So thank you, David. Tomorrow is May 7th. That's the day that I came to America, in 1947. And I just wanted to tell you a little bit about my introduction coming to America. I came here as a teenager with my sister, a sister who was a few years older than I was. We arrived May 7, 1947 in New York on a military ship. And I remember coming off the ship, looking at the port, how beautiful it was. There were a Jewish committee waiting for us. I did not speak the language, I did not know the culture, and I did not know where I was going. These people took us on a bus, and we drove all the way through Manhattan. It was the most beautiful sight to see. The lights, the signs were just absolutely amazing. They took us to a settlement house, I believe, and there were about 18 of us, and I was the youngest among the 18. And they gave us each pajamas, and each one got an orange and a Hershey bar. And I had not seen an orange probably since before the war. So my sister and I decided to eat the oranges right away. And the Hershey bar, I decided to save it for the next day. I thought, I'll save it, so what do I do with it? I put it underneath my pillow. Very funny. So the next morning, of course, when I got up, you know what happened to the candy bar. It was all melted. And another funny thing happened. We went down to breakfast. I had not been used to eating cold milk for breakfast with cereal. I had never seen cereal before. So here we were sitting at the table, and they were passing around the boxes of cereal and, what's the other one? Rice Krispies and cold milk. And that's another introduction I had never heard of. We usually for breakfast had hot milk. The third thing that I was introduced was, we were in New York for 1 week, and we stayed, they took us to Coney Island, and that was the first time when I had a hot dog. It was delicious. And they showed us the whole city. We went to the Empire State Building, to the radio station, and a few other very important areas in New York. We stayed in New York for 1 week, and then they transferred me to Chicago. They found an orphanage. They sent me to an orphanage in Chicago. And we were there there must have been about 200 children, and it wasn't all refugee children, it was also American children. Now, mind you, I did not speak English. I did not understand anything that anybody said to me. The only language I spoke was Yiddish and Hebrew, and I could understand a few other languages. So it was very, very difficult for me. But I stayed in Chicago for 6 weeks till they found a foster home for me in Minneapolis. And I will stop right now, and I will start telling you how did it come that I am here in Minneapolis. I was born in Warsaw, Poland in 1933. I had a mother and a father, of course, and I had 4 sisters and a brother, and I had another little sister who died as an infant. 1939, September 1st, the Germans entered Poland. For 2 weeks, they bombarded the city without stop. And I remember running from one building to another building with my mother always dragging me along because the fire, if one building started on fire, we ran to another building. On September 14, my father was killed by a bomb. He was 42 years old. He had gone out actually to look for my older sister because he was worried. She had gone out with her boyfriend. She was 17 years old, and she had not returned home. So he was worried, so he was out to look for her, and we never saw my father again. So 2 days later, he didn't come home, and my mother went out looking for him with my oldest sisters. I was only 7 years old, so they would not allow me to go. They finally found my father at the cemetery. It looks as though he had been trampled to death because there were no other signs. All he had was a sign on his forehead, like scratches on his forehead. His shoes were gone. His suit was gone. And other than that, there was no other sign. So we figured that the only reason it could have been that during the bombing of the city of Warsaw, that he could have been just trampled to death. The next day, my mother and my older sisters all went to the cemetery. They would not allow me to go. I was too young. And I believe that my father was buried in a grave with 500 other people. All these people were all killed during the bombing of the city. My mother came back. Needless to say, she was a widow with 6 children. And the bombing had finally stopped. And when we went out on the streets, all we could see were dead horses, a lot of dead horses, some dead Polish soldiers, and a lot of people were cutting up the horses for food, because for about 2 weeks we had nothing to eat, because during the bombing we couldn't get any food whatsoever. Finally, the bombing started. The Germans came in, and they marched into the city of Warsaw, and they were very kind, actually, in the beginning. They gave us all soup. We got into the line to get food. They gave us soup and bread. And then we decided to go back to our old house, because during the bombing, we had gone to live with an aunt. So after the bombing had stopped, we decided to go back to our own house. We had no heat in the house. We had no food in the house. So my sisters, my older sisters, started to smuggle food. They went into the Aryan side, on the other side, and they were bringing in food from the other side. That's the only way we could get the food. And that lasted for a little bit, not too long. Then in 1940, finally, this was 1939, finally the beginning of up to 1940, things were pretty good. We still were living in our own homes. The only thing was we had very little food. We had very little, the people, it wasn't just the food. The people were so restless. The people were so mean. It was just unbelievable what was happening to the people, what was going on. And finally, 1940 came, and I was supposed to go start school. And then the Germans said Jews were not allowed to go back to school. Jews had to wear what are they called? Marks with the Star of David. We had to wear. Starting from age 7, you had to wear those to identify that you were a Jew. There was a lot of what is the word? Misunderstanding what was happening to all of us. The next thing we know, we were told that we had to move out of our apartment. We were moving into a ghetto. I'm sure all of you know what a ghetto is. We were very, very lucky because my aunt lived on the street where the ghetto was originally going to be held, sort of marked off. So we moved in with my aunt, who her husband had been killed on the way. He tried to escape to go to Russia, and he died on the way. So we moved in with our aunt. But what they did, it wasn't just moving in. What they did, they assigned 2 to 3 families to an apartment. And what happens when a lot of people live in apartments? You find disease, hunger, crime. Everything was happening in a very, very short time. Then the next thing, we were told that we could not go to school anymore. I could not go to school. We were given ration cards. We could not buy any food on our own. They gave us a card which consisted of maybe 800 calories, something like that, a piece of bread and some soup. And they started, some of the younger people started working, cleaning up the ghetto, the Warsaw, from the bombing, that they had bombed the city so badly, was bombed very badly. So they took all the young people to work. And before we knew it, they were starting to they started to evacuate the people First, they built a wall that was, I think, 11 feet high. And on top of the wall, they had glass. So in case you wanted to escape through the wall, you would be cut to pieces. So nobody really tried to do it. But slowly they started removing the people from the ghetto. They built a ghetto and they started removing the people, mostly the young men and the young women. And slowly but surely, the ghetto became less and less and less. The sickness in the ghetto was unbelievable. Typhoid, right? Was rampage. You see dead bodies everywhere I went out of the house. You would see dead bodies on the streets. People were picking up dead bodies, and they were rag dolls. Everywhere you go, you would see these dead bodies because they were dying of starvation already. And finally, in 1942, this was 1940, 41, it was really getting very, very bad in the ghetto. The Germans were unbelievable. You couldn't even go out. Most of the time, being that I was so young, I was sitting in the house. I was afraid to go out. But even if you go out, you would be afraid that they would catch you on the street and take you away. In 1942, we knew that something had to be done. So my mother, I had another sister, my other sister who died with my mother in Treblinka. My mother had said to all of us, the three sisters and my brother and myself, to try to get out of the Warsaw ghetto. Well, it wasn't that easy to get out of the ghetto because we had this big wall and the SS soldiers guarding at the door, at the gate, so it wasn't that easy to get out. But luckily enough for all of us, for my sisters and I, we did not look the typical Jews, what everybody assumes a Jew should look like. We were all light-colored, light eyes. We looked like a normal Jewish people. So we decided to try to go through the gate, through the wall. But she couldn't just walk through. Being that I was the youngest, I was 7. At that point, I was already almost 8, 9 years old. We decided to wait a while, and we're going to go crawl in underneath to get underneath the wall. There were holes underneath, like for rats, but it was bigger because people would sneak through them, so they would become bigger and bigger. And we decided to do that. My mother and sister decided for us to go first. And the reason was my sister, who was limping. She had one leg shorter than the other. So she was afraid to go with us because she was afraid she would slow us down. My mother, on the other hand, did not speak Polish, and I did not speak Polish. I never went to school, so I never learned the language. So there was a question of me, if I get into on the other side of the ghetto among the Polish people, I would have a hard time because they could tell right away I was Jewish. But all my sisters all had gone to school, and they spoke a perfect Polish. So they were able to go through the regular gate. They wore crosses. They pretended that they were non-Jewish girls, and they went through the gate. Me, on the other hand, with my other sister, Edina, who was just 4 years older than I was, we had to crawl through the hall where the wall was. But we were lucky. Somehow or another, I always wonder, somebody had to watch over me because nobody paid attention. And we went through the hall into the Aryan side, hoping and praying that they would take care of us. Got news for you, nobody did. We went to a family that my father was dealing with in business, and we had brought him money and we brought him things to give to this family, hoping that they would take care of us. And during the night, this man got drunk. And during the night, he came with a hatchet at us, yelling, "Dirty Jew, get out of here." So my older sister, Ann, grabbed me by my hand, and my other two sisters and brother. We ran out of the house, ran into a cornfield. And we stayed in that cornfield till morning. When morning came, we decided to go to a small town by the name of Dimblin, which was near Lublin, which is not far where my Majdanek was. We had family in that town. My mother's brothers and sister lived in that town. So we thought that we would go to that town hoping that we would find somebody. But meanwhile, we had to travel. So we all went by train. We got on the train. We all wore crosses, so nobody knew that we were Jewish. I only spoke Yiddish, as I said. So we sat on the train, and I pretended that I was a mute. Didn't open my mouth the whole time while I was there. And while I was on the train, there were Gestapo, SS, the soldiers, the regular soldiers. And I sat on the train for maybe 2 hours till I got to the small town where my mother's family was. And we finally arrived there. And when we arrived, all the Jews had been accumulated into a circle, already gathered up to be taken away to Auschwitz. And we wanted to go with them because we were afraid being on the outside of the world, eventually they would kill us. The Polish people would not save us, the Germans would kill us anyway, so we decided to go back with the Jews. And of course, we took our crosses off, threw the crosses away, and they wouldn't let us in, these people, the Jewish people, because they thought we were Gentile girls. So finally, there was an uncle, my mother's brother-in-law, I believe, recognized all of us, and he said that we were Pearl's children, let him in, tell him into the group. So they couldn't take us during the day, so at nighttime, they put my brother into a cement mixer, and my sisters and I, they put in garbage cans, and they took us into that circle where the people were standing in the square, in that Demblin. And finally, we were among our Jewish people, with all our relatives had been killed already. Of course, my mom was dead. My mom, they took away to Treblinka with my sister. My father had been killed in the ghetto, in the bombing. And all my uncles had been taken away already too. So other than that uncle by marriage, we had nobody in that group. But they took us in, and then they took us, can I get a drink? Here. Thank you. They took us in the square, they lined us all up, and they took us into boxcars. I don't have to tell you what the boxcars were like. Very crowded, very dirty, very smelly, very awful. Crowded, there was no room to sit, all you had to do was stand up. We were on those boxcars for about a night and a half, I think. We've traveled to another camp. They were taking, I'm sorry, I'm mixing this up. They took us to this first camp, which was called Demblin. And in that particular camp where I was there, we had 11 children still. And the camp was not too bad. They gave us soup and a piece of bread. Most of the men and the women went to work. Most of them worked in either gardens for the Germans. Some of the others were building airports for the Germans. But I was only 9 years old, and most of the time I was hidden in the barrack because I was afraid that if they would see me, they would catch me and probably take me away and kill me right away. So those 11 children, 10 children, I was the 11th one. So we were sort of hidden in the barracks. But finally in 1944, we were in that camp from 42 to 44. 1944, the Russians were already advancing. The war was getting a little bit closer. The Germans were losing a little more. So the Germans decided to transfer that camp into another camp. And in 1944, July of 1944, they took us to another camp, again in the boxcars with no water, no. And I remember one day they opened up the boxcar to let in a little bit of fresh air, yeah. And the Polish people were standing along the train, on the outside of the train, on the fields, and they were, what is the word, sneering, is the word sneering? Making fun of us, making faces at us. And here we were sitting in the train. Instead of being helpful to us or bringing water or giving comfort, they gave us nothing but hate. Anyway, we finally arrived to the other camp, Częstochow. And that camp was 1944, July. And they separated the men and the women and the 11 children. Actually, I should say the 10 children plus me, 11 of us. And the men and the women up this rope, they took off the clothes from the previous camp, and they went in different directions. And I was standing with the 10 children. One child was 11 months old, a little girl, who had been born in the camp before. And the German soldier, that's SS, said to me, now mind you, I was 11 years old already. I was a blonde little girl. He looked at me. I was holding the 6-month-old little girl, and he said to me, "Schmeiß das Kind weg, throw this child away." So I took the little baby and I put it down on the ground. And he told me, believe it or not, to run. The German told me to run. But at the same time, the same German took a machine gun and killed the other 10 children. Right in front of me. I was actually, where I was I had noticed that they was disrobing the uniforms from the previous camps, though I hid in the dirty uniforms. And the German just took a machine gun just like this, blah, 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 like that. Killed all children. I waited till nightfall, till it got dark, and I noticed where the women were going in the camp, in the barrack. So I came in, I went into the barrack, and right away when I came in, the mothers all started screaming at me because I was the oldest from all the children. And they said, "What happened? Where are the kids?" And I said, "I don't know what happened to them." I wouldn't tell them what happened to them. But needless to say, I didn't have to tell them. They knew what happened to them. I was in that camp for from July till the following January. We had very little food. Again, they gave us soup that had white worms and God only knows what else was in there, I don't know. But a piece of bread and some worms and soup every day. They would call us up every morning to go for the appeal, 4 a.m, call out the name, come back at night. And I worked with my sisters in an ammunition factory. There were 5 different camps in that particular Częstochow, Poland. And I worked washing bullets. That was my job. My sisters were working at the machines where the bullets were coming out. And one day, my older sister Ann was working at the machine, and her machine got stuck. The bullet got stuck in the machine, and she couldn't remove the bullet. It wouldn't go either way. And this hexer, whatever it was called, the woman who was in charge at the factory came over, took my sister off the chair, and gave her 50 lashes with a what is it called? not a leather strap, right in front of everybody. My poor sister couldn't sit for days. She couldn't sit, just because the machine got stuck and she couldn't remove the bullet. So this was our job in the camp: getting up every morning, going to work, working at the machines, making the bullets, coming back, sitting in the barracks. The dirt, the lice, the bugs, I cannot even begin to tell you what it felt like. It was unimaginable. Now that we're sitting here and we're also nice and clean, you cannot imagine what it is like, where you have to take with your hand to shovel the lice and the bugs from you. Look, awful. So we lived in that camp for about, from July till the following January. Most of the time, I tried to avoid going out because I was trying to stay in the barracks, because I was afraid if an SS guy would see me, he might have an idea and see a little girl and he might just try to kill her for the pleasure of him, whatever. So we worked in that camp for till January 1945. January 1945, I was liberated by the Russian army. But the day before the liberation, they had taken out my older sister and my two other sisters, who are no longer living, and I was out too. And they were calling out the appeal because they wanted to remove all of the inmates from the camps, because they didn't want the Russians to find the inmates in the camps. So they were taking us all into the boxcars, to the train. And when my name was called, my older sister Ann, who was at that time already 20-some years old, went out instead, because she knew that if they would call me, that I would be killed right away. They would just kill me before I even had a chance to go to the boxcar. But luckily enough for all of us, the Russians were approaching faster than the Germans could move. So the Germans never had a chance to take the train with all the inmates on the train. So in the evening, we could hear the camp being bombed. The Russians were bombing the camps. And so we were very, very happy, of course. We didn't exactly know who was coming. But the next morning, when we got up January 17, 1945, the gates of the camp were open, and the people were like, I can't even begin to tell, like animals out of a cage. We did not know which direction to go. We didn't even know where to go. Should we go back to Poland, where we really didn't want to go back? Should we go back to Germany? There was no place for us to go. But we had made up our mind, my sisters, my older sisters, that we were going to go back to the city where my parents were born, to the small town, Dęblin, which is not far from Lublin. And when we got there, it took us 3 weeks to walk from the camp to Dęblin. I had no shoes, no clothes other than what I wore. My feet were full of wounds, and they were wrapped around with rags, whatever I had. So for 3 weeks we walked, finally got to that place, hoping that we would find somebody alive. We knew that my mother and we knew that my mother and sister and my grandma and everybody else had died already. Most of my family had died in the Warsaw Ghetto from starvation. The ones that were taken away to camps were killed in Treblinka. But we were hoping against hope that somebody had survived, and nobody had. So when we came to this town back to Dęblin, and they were the Russian army were there. But the Russian army was a very poor army. They had nothing to give us. And me being the youngest at that point, I was 12 years old. I was liberated when I was 12. I was always sent in front because the young women, my sisters were young, very good-looking young girls, and the other people who had survived, they always sent me ahead because they were afraid the soldiers wouldn't get after me. The soldiers would usually go after the pretty young women. So I was always set ahead of time. And they said, Riva, you go out, see if you can find any food. So I went out in the neighborhood where we lived. We lived in a burned-out house without a roof. And I went out to looking for food. This was already January 1945. And there was no food to be had. The Polish people were not kind. They were not good to us. So I went looking in the garbage, looked in the garbage, and I found a lot of potato peelings. So I brought back the potato peelings, and what we did, we had like an army, what do they call, a can, and we heated, we made a fire in that house, and we put some snow. We didn't have water because it was January. And we put the snow in with the peelings, and we cooked them on the fire, and this is what we ate. Till today, I still cannot stand potato peelings. Have I got more time? Okay. While I was in Lublin, we walked back to Lublin. We found out that there were a lot of Jews gathering there, and that they were gathering all the young children, whoever. You got to realize that most of the children were murdered. 1.5 million children were murdered by the Nazis. So I was very unusual for me for a 12-year-old. There weren't too many 12-year-olds who survived. So we found out in Lublin, which was not far where I was in Demblin, but we had no way of getting there. We had no transportation. So we got on the train, on the outside of the train, not inside of the train, and we traveled to Lublin thinking that we would find, hopefully we always, till today, and I've been in America already since 1947. I still look at pictures, whether they show Holocaust pictures or movies or whatever. I still look, hoping that I would see a familiar face. But my whole family perished. Other than my sisters, I did survive with 3 sisters and a brother. And eventually, why I tell you I came to America, eventually, we're back to Germany, to the American side, where the Americans were. And one day an American soldier came in. We had this school, makeshift school, and the American soldiers from the UNRWA came in, and they wanted to know if they were orphans. And I raised my hand, and they said, do you want to go to America? And but meanwhile, I said I couldn't I raised my hand, but I had to go home and ask my older sister if I can go, because she's really, at that point, was already married, and she was the one who took care of me. So when I came back to the DP camp, I was in a DP camp, she said, absolutely, you go to America, you're young, you'll have a new life, you'll have a wonderful life. And that's how I ended up in America, but that's another life story. Any questions?
We're going to take a few questions. Okay. Do you want? Okay. I'm going to repeat the questions if you don't say it in the mic.
Do you suppose the reason that German did not shoot you when you had a baby because you were blonde?
I think the reason he did not shoot me was because I either reminded him of his own child or I reminded him of a grandchild, because I was a blonde, cute little girl. Small, I was only 9, 10 years old at that time, 11 maybe. So I think I often wonder. And another thing, I think for one split second that man had a heart. No reason. I was not special. My mother, 6 million other Jews were just as good as I was. I was not. But I do feel one thing, though. I feel there had to be a reason for me to survive. Because if I did not survive, I would not be here telling you what happened. Because people cannot believe. We still have people that are denying the Holocaust 70-some years later. Can you believe that? So it's sheer luck that I survived. Oh, thank you.
Another question? Yeah.
Hi, thank you. Just wondering what business your father was in, what he did for his living.
My father was, he made brand new shoes. He and several men worked at the house. We had a special area in the house where they were making brand new shoes. He was a shoemaker by profession, but he did not repair shoes. Actually, I remember he made a pair of shoes for me in 1938, which I still remember them today. They were beautiful Oxford red and blue little shoes that I wore the whole time in the ghetto, in the Warsaw ghetto. That was his profession. But he did not live long enough. He was killed at age 42, and my mother was 39.
Okay, I'm coming out for this question.
Yeah, to come, I can hear, I can see.
You don't have to answer this, but I do want to know what date in 1933 were you born?
What day?
What date? Day and date.
She wants to know the date. March 4, 1933.
Okay, that'll help me. Thank you.
I just had my 85th birthday. I'm an old lady. Don't tell anybody.
Riva, this is a question about the German government and the restitution movement. Have you had any connections, any conversations about property being restituted to you because you lost your home and lost everything?
I don't understand the question. What?
Oh, so it's only from Germany, so there's no restitution for Poles. Okay.
So there's an international organization called the Claims Conference, and it is their job to recover from many foreign governments what was stolen, and it's a very complex system. So hopefully that's enough of an answer for your question.
Riva, I have a question about, as you were telling the story, you mentioned that about you and your sisters. Where was your brother at this time?
When did my brother what?
You were talking about how you and your sisters were going to the different places and escaping from here to there, but where was your brother at that same time? With you?
In the camp? Yeah, he was in a different barracks. We were all in the same camp, but the men were different barracks.
What about your brother and sister? Did they all come to the United States eventually?
I came here with my sister Edina. She was 17 years old. We were both orphans. And then when the two of us got married, we brought our two other sisters. At that time, they were living in Germany, in Munich, in the DP camp. And then my brother, who originally thought that we were going to go to Israel, we were all planning to go to Israel, but my brother left in 1945 with the illegal Aliyah, immigration, and so he was in Israel all by himself, and the four sisters were here. So we decided for him to come here too, and we've been here ever since. It's the best thing I could have done. I had an uncle, my father's brother, who also went to America, and he's actually the one who kept urging me. He said, "You go to America. It'll be good for you. You're young. You'll get an education." And he was right. It's the best country in the world. With all our faults, whatever we have, I don't want to mention any names. But it's still the best country in the world. That's it.
One question here, right here.
Okay.
Right here first, and then I'll come back to her.
Yeah, we talk a lot about forgiveness. How do you feel as where you are now about your forgiveness of the Polish people who treated you so poorly and the German people? How do you feel about the
How do I feel about him now?
Yeah.
The Polish? You don't want to know. Like I said to Judy, anybody that was born the same time that I was, that's your husband, isn't it? Yes. What's her name? Yeah. She's in my way, I can't talk.
Wait till she's finished. I'm just giving this to you.
Okay, where is he? Anybody that was born the same time that I was, I have nothing against them because they were children like I was. But anyone who was at least 10 years older than I am, they knew what was going on. Either they were in the army, and the Polish, they just were not. So that's why I have no grudges against all these people. You know, a couple years ago, we went back to Berlin, 2.5 years ago. I took my son, daughter, and granddaughter, and the reason we went back to Berlin, I said, I'll never go to Berlin or Poland, but I have been to Poland twice. But Berlin, I only went back to Berlin because my husband, Ben, wanted to go, but unfortunately he died too soon. And I had kept the promise, and I said I'd go because he couldn't go. And he wanted to go to Berlin to stand in front of the Brandenburg Gate with his children and grandchildren to show that Hitler did not succeed, that Hitler did not kill us all.
Well, that seemed like a really good place to end, but if you have one more question.
I'm just curious. The sister that you asked, who was married, if you should come to America, did she go with you or did she come after? Oh, is Anne? Okay, I know Anne. I knew Anne. Yeah.
She was asking the order of your siblings coming, sort of how soon you came with one and then the others came.
With the Jewish family and children now.
Yeah. And that's me. So you stay here. Yeah. So first of all, please, let's show our appreciation for Riva. Do you want to stay here or do you want to sit?
I'm going to sit on it.
Thank you, everyone. Please have a seat because we're not actually done with our program. We have one more really important piece of today's program. And thank you, Riva, for sharing. It's difficult and it's emotional, and we appreciate you sharing that with us. We're all enriched for being able to hear your account of something that for most of us we know very little about, certainly didn't live through ourselves, and so thank you. The next person who we're going to spend a few minutes with is somebody who I'm really proud to call my dear old friend David Sherman, who I've known for, I don't know, David, 30 some years, I guess. And he is a brilliant photographer and an incredible and gifted and kind person who, in addition to doing so many good things, just broadly in our community, has really taken it upon himself with some other people from an organization called the Jewish Community Relations Council. And what they have attempted to do, David will tell you precisely the dates and how long it's taken, but they've done a project called the Transfer of Memory, which has been a race against time to take pictures and gather the information of people like Riva who have a story to tell, a firsthand account. And it's a brilliant exhibit, which David's going to tell you how it came to be and how you can find out more about it. And so, David Sherman.
Thank you. Can I stand? Can I do that? All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Let's have my prepared remarks here. Mr. Mayor, members of the Edina City Council, members of the Edina Human Rights Commission. Oh, I need to come to the center, huh? Okay, sorry. Thank you for including me on this important program. Although, Reva, it's always difficult to follow you on the program. So yeah, sometime. But I hate these remarks. The program today with the picture of the boxcar is so appropriate that Reva is speaking, and then I do get to follow her on the program. Because when I made the portrait of Reva and her husband Ben, we spent a lot of time talking about the boxcars. And with each of the 40-some survivors, actually 50-some survivors that we photographed and made portraits of and interviewed, I learned something new from each encounter. And I walked away from visiting with Reva and Ben with this understanding about what life in the boxcar was like. And I had never really understood that. So that's something that I always remember from our time together. And so this is really a telling and a beautiful and appropriate cover. So I wanted to do this project, which I now call Transfer of Memory, and I've been blessed that the Jewish Community Relations Council of Minnesota and the Dakotas partnered with me, that we created Transfer of Memory. And I wanted to do this project since I was 10. And when I was 10, which was 50 years ago, in 1968, if you keep doing the math, which was about 23 years after the end of World War II, in the community where I grew up in Sioux City, Iowa, we dedicated a Holocaust memorial. It was the first real public memorial to the Holocaust in Sioux City. And it was a monument. It is a monument and almost like a large gravestone. But at the dedication, there were these people who were uncontrollably sad, who were wailing. And as I learned that these were the survivors of the Holocaust. And I couldn't, as a 10-year-old, put my finger on what was going on. And so that really has stuck with me for my entire life. And so when I became a photographer and when I had the opportunity to do this project, I remember that day as a 10-year-old, that day in June of 1968, that experience that I had. And so really Transfer of Memory has been my attempt, my work to understand the survivors and understanding of the Holocaust. Our survivor community is aged and aging. The number of living survivors is becoming fewer and fewer. It is important to me to do all that I can to ensure that the survivors are remembered in a respectful and a beautiful way, by face, by name, and by story. The fifth of the 5 books of Moses, Deuteronomy, is a retelling of the narrative of the Jewish people. There is a shift in word choice from the first 4 chapters. There is a shift in word choice in the first 4 chapters of Deuteronomy. In the retelling of the events of the past, of the wilderness, There is a shift in the verbs from verbs of sight to verbs of hearing. The Israelites were on the verge of entering the land of Israel after the desert generation had died out. They needed a new mode to transmit and preserve the covenant which their parents and grandparents had experienced firsthand. The shift is to a sense of hearing or telling over seeing and experiencing. The biblical stories of the Exodus, Sinai, and the wilderness are deliberately recast in terms of hearing over eyewitnessing. It is a deliberate literary move to shift the focus from the power and reliability of sight to the trustworthiness and importance of hearing in the transmission of the covenant and Jewish culture. Today, we stand at a critical time in regard to the Holocaust. 70 years since the end of the war, we are in the midst of the transfer of memory. The witness to the horrors, hardships, and brutalities of the Holocaust is shifting from those who saw and survived to a retelling of their testimony. A shifting of the focus from the power and reliability of sight and personal experience to the trustworthiness and importance of hearing. My images, I hope, add an important visual proof to accompany the oral testimony. Transfer of Memory features 44 portraits, of survivors living or who lived in Minnesota. The color images depict the survivors as living full lives, as you saw with Riva, full of life and vitality, not defined by victimhood, not stuck in the past, anchored but not frozen. We visited each survivor in their home, spent anywhere from a half an hour to an hour and a half doing an interview, visiting, learning about their experience, really getting to know each of the survivors. I then had the opportunity to make their portrait and hopefully to really make a portrait of their personality, of their lives, and all the things that they have accomplished since the end of the Holocaust. Working in the survivors' homes contributed so positively to the project. Immediately, I sensed something special happening. To see life's mementos, photographs of families, past and present, many their Holocaust relics. We were allowed into the survivors' lives. The only word I can use to explain it is holiness, kadosh in Hebrew. I felt as if we were welcomed into a makom kadosh each time, a holy place. The survivors raised the tenor of the project from the everyday, or the mundane, to the kadosh, or the holy. And I think today, having met Riva and listened to Riva, you can get a sense for what the experience was like for me and my team when we came into people's homes and learned the stories and had survivors open up to us. Transfer of Memory is a record of that holiness. It is about the love of a daughter for her mother, as Eva Gross talks about with her mother, Ella Weiss. It is about returning to Europe from the United States as an intelligence officer to fight the Nazis, as Walter Schwartz did. It is about hiding in the Greek mountains like Victor Vital. It is about escaping to Shanghai, as Kurt Hort did. It is about a strong-willed mother, as Fred Amram tells. Transfer of Memory is about the love and protection of family siblings, as Riva Keyboard tells, as she is also included in the exhibition with her brother Mark Mandel and Ann Potasic. Interestingly, what struck me about the project is the personal responsibility I had unknowingly taken on. To make beautiful, respectful portraits is what I try to do every day. The survivors I worked with on this project demonstrated to me what the concept of holiness is really all about. I set out to document a shrinking group of Jews, Holocaust survivors, and ended up experiencing holiness. It's a truly humbling experience. It became apparent that mine would likely be the last portrait made of some of the participants. As an artist, as a person, it is difficult for me to express my feelings about this. To find meaning, I go back to the transfer of memory language, the shift from the power and reliability of sight and experience to the trustworthiness and importance of hearing. There is an old saying that says a photograph is worth 1,000 words. In the case of transfer of memory, my portraits have been elevated and given the context I sought with the words which accompany each image. And if you go to the website, you can see the text and the photos, and the website is transferofmemory.org, and you will see Lily Chester's beautiful work to take my very poorly constructed interviews and create the record of the stories of each of the survivors and give them context and meaning. I want to conclude with a poem, if I may. And this poem was written by Edward Yashinsky, who is a Yiddish poet who survived the Holocaust, only to die in a communist prison in Poland after the war. Fear not your enemies, for they can only kill you. Fear not your friends, for they can only betray you. Fear only the indifferent, who permit the killers and betrayers to walk softly on earth. And I applaud the works of the Edina Human Rights Commission for holding this annual event, for inviting Riva, and for including me on the program, because it really is through efforts like this that we can fight the indifferent and make sure that genocide and Holocaust do not happen again. So thank you so much. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, David, for those remarks. I just want to end with a few comments. I want to say again, thank you to everyone that came out. Thank you so much, Ms. Riva, for sharing your very personal and touching story. Thank you, Judy, for all the work that you have done and for connecting our commission to Riva. We truly appreciate you. As I was listening to your remarks, Ms. Riva, 2 words stuck with me, and I want to end or share these 2 words with the audience today. And the first word was hope. You said hoping against hope. And in our world today, we know that there is a lot of indifference and there is a lot of darkness everywhere you go. And they always say that only light can combat darkness. But I think hope is one of those tools that you need to have in your toolbox when you are trying to fight darkness. So Ms. Riva has given us hope today. And then the second word that you left us with that was very powerful to me was gratitude. And you said, you found ways to be even thankful for those potato skins, even though you'll never eat them again. And I'll never look at potato skins again after listening to your remarks today. But in all things, we do have thanks, and we do have things to be thankful for. So as we go out back to our lives, go with the tools of hope, go with the tool of gratitude. I'd like to recognize the Human Rights and Relations Committee members who worked relentlessly to put this program together. They're standing in the back. I see Cindy Edwards. If you'd like to wave your hand. Michelle Meek. I saw Michelle there. Pat Arsenault, who is kind of like the unofficial chair. Our student commissioners, Samaya Mangalik. I see her right there. And then Parsoon Sinha. We'd ask that you take a moment to complete the brief survey that's in your program. I actually think it was in the basket. You might have received that when you came in. The next big event that our commission will be doing is in the fall, and that's a Sharing Values and Sharing Community event. So we invite you to look out for further details. And finally, please feel free to spend a few minutes in the lobby with our speakers and viewing the information on the exhibit. Thank you so much.